courtroom was silent, so silent that every breath felt heavy in the air. Wooden benches creaked as people shifted nervously, eyes fixed on the door. Everyone knew this was no ordinary trial. It wasn't just another man facing judgment, it was Ethan Carter, the tomb guard who carried the Medal of Honor on his chest. Then came the sound: tap, tap, tap. The echo of polished boots, striking the marble floor, filled the room. Slow, measured, controlled. The kind of march that told you this was not just a soldier, this was a man shaped by discipline, sacrifice, and an oath to never break. As Ethan stepped inside, the sunlight caught the small piece of metal on his chest. The Medal of Honor gleamed with a brilliance that silenced whispers. People rose ever so slightly, straining to catch a glimpse. Some lowered their eyes, overcome by the weight of what that medal meant. Courage beyond imagination, a sacrifice most would never dare to make. But at the judge's bench, the reaction was different. Judge Hargrove leaned forward, eyes narrowing. His face twisted, not with admiration but with irritation. To him, that medal was an honor. It was a disruption, a distraction, something that challenged the authority of his courtroom. His gavel struck once, sharp and impatient. "Mr. Carter," the judge's voice cracked like a whip. "This is not a parade ground. Remove that medal immediately." A ripple of shock moved through the gallery. Gasps broke the silence. A veteran in the back clenched his fists but said nothing. The Medal of Honor was sacred, untouchable. To demand its removal was more than unusual. It was offensive. Ethan stopped. His eyes, calm and unwavering, lifted toward the bench. He did not speak. He did not protest. His silence carried more power than words. The judge scowled. "Do you defy the court?" Still Ethan said nothing. He simply stood tall and unbroken, the medal glowing like a shield against the insult. For a moment, it wasn't a courtroom anymore. It was a battlefield. One man against the weight of authority. One soldier holding a line no one else could see. And as the tension thickened, everyone knew. This was only the beginning. The gavel struck again, louder this time, echoing through the wooden walls of the Warrington courthouse. Judge Robert Hargrove's face was a mask of irritation, his gray eyes cold as steel. He leaned forward, every word laced with authority. "Corporal Ethan Carter," he said, his voice sharp enough to cut the silence. "Remove that medal now. This is my courtroom, and here my rules apply." The crowd shifted uneasily. Veterans in the back row exchanged glances. A woman in the third row clutched her purse tighter, whispering under her breath. For them, this wasn't just about a medal. It was about everything it stood for. Sacrifice, honor, and memory carved into the fabric of a nation. Ethan didn't move. His boots were planted, his spine straight as a rifle. The Medal of Honor gleamed against his dark blue uniform coat, a beacon of defiance. His voice, when it finally came, was low, steady, and unshakable. "With all due respect, Your Honor," he said, "this medal doesn't belong to me. It belongs to the men who never came home. I wear it for them." The words rolled across the room like thunder. The crowd exhaled, some in awe, others trembling with anger. But Judge Hargrove's lips curled into a sneer. He drummed his fingers on the bench, unmoved by the gravity of the soldier's words. "I don't care who it belongs to," Hargrove snapped. "This is not Arlington Cemetery. This is not your sacred tomb. This is my courtroom, and in here you will obey. Remove it or you will not testify." The tension snapped taut like a rope pulled to breaking point. For a long moment, Ethan remained frozen. His gaze never wavered from the judge's. The silence in the room was suffocating, so thick it seemed even the air dared not move. Finally, with deliberate precision, the kind that marked every step he had ever taken as a tomb guard, Ethan reached up. His fingers brushed the metal, pausing as though reluctant to part with it. Then slowly, he unclasped it from his uniform. The sound of the metal being set on the wooden ledge beside the microphone was small, almost insignificant. But to those who watched, it was deafening. Clink. Like a gunshot, it cracked through the soul of the room. Veterans in the gallery shifted, their jaws tightening. One older man wearing a faded army cap muttered, "That ain't right." A woman wiped a tear from her cheek. The bailiff glanced nervously at the judge but said nothing. Judge Hargrove leaned back, satisfied. "Swear him in," he ordered, as though nothing extraordinary had happened. But something had happened. Everyone knew it. Everyone felt it. Something had shifted. An invisible line had been crossed. Ethan raised his right hand, his voice steady, strong. I, Ethan Carter, do solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. So help me God. The bailiff stepped back and Ethan sat at the witness stand. But though his posture was rigid and disciplined, his eyes betrayed a storm beneath the surface. The plaintiff's attorney, Paul Grayson, began his questions. Dull, procedural, about property lines and road access. Ethan answered each one with clarity and precision, but the room wasn't listening. No one cared about the easement. Their eyes remained on the small piece of metal glinting under the fluorescent light, lying abandoned on the judge's desk. It was more than a decoration. It was the weight of sacrifice, and now stripped from Ethan's chest, it seemed like a flag forced to the ground. When the opposing counsel, Richard Holt, rose to cross-examine, his voice carried a smugness that grated. "Corporal Carter," he said smoothly, "you claim you were given a key to the gate by the Larson family. But that was years ago, wasn't it?" "Memories can fade." Ethan's jaw tightened. "I don't forget what matters." The crowd hummed, a ripple of quiet approval. Holt pressed on, smirking. "So you expect us to believe that after 20 years your memory of this alleged agreement is perfect?" Ethan's voice was calm but unyielding. "I know what I was told, and I know what I owe," Holt faltered. His smile thinned. "No further questions, Your Honor." Judge Hargrove leaned forward again, irritation flashing across his face. "This is not a history lesson or a war memorial," he snapped. "We are here for facts, not feelings. This courtroom does not bow to sentiment." The words landed like a slap. Veterans clenched their fists. Murmurs broke out, louder this time. "Not right," someone whispered. Another hissed, "Shame." The energy in the room shifted, surging like a current. Respect once held for the judge's bench was gone. Every eye turned to Ethan. Every heart seemed to pound in unison. Grayson tried to regain order, requesting to recall the witness later. The judge waved him off, barking, "Step down, Corporal." Ethan rose slowly, every movement deliberate. His eyes flickered toward the metal lying on the wooden ledge. For a moment it seemed he might take it. Instead, he left it there, walking back to his seat in silence. The metal remained, a silent accusation, a symbol of defiance against the arrogance that had just unfolded. And in that silence, something else stirred. From the back row, a woman rose to her feet. She was older, her posture straight as a soldier's, her gaze unflinching. Her voice, calm but commanding, cut through the tension like a blade. "Your Honor," she said firmly, "I have something to say." Judge Hargrove's head snapped up, startled. His gavel slammed against the wood. "This is highly irregular. Sit down or I will have you removed." But the woman did not move. Her presence alone seemed to quiet the room, drawing every eye to her. "My name is Colonel Sarah Ningguan, United States Army, retired," she declared, stepping into the aisle. Her words carried weight, an authority the judge's gavel could never match. "I was there when Corporal Carter earned that medal you made him remove, and I will not let this insult stand." The crowd gasped. For the first time, Judge Hargrove's composure cracked. His eyes flickered, uncertain. And in that moment, the balance of power in the courtroom shifted forever. The wooden benches groaned as heads turned toward the voice that had cut through the courtroom like a sudden crack of lightning. She stood tall in the aisle, her short-cropped hair silver at the edges, her navy blue suit pressed with the precision of a soldier. She wasn't armed, but her presence radiated power, an aura that commanded silence without effort. "I am Colonel Sarah Ningguan, United States Army, retired," she said, her voice steady, unflinching. "And I will not sit quietly while you strip a man of honor in front of his community." For a heartbeat, the room was frozen. Even the ceiling fans seemed to halt in their lazy spin. The bailiff looked to the judge, unsure whether to move or stay rooted. Judge Hargrove's face reddened, his authority slipping like sand through clenched fists. He slammed the gavel down with fury. "This is a court of law, ma'am. You are out of order. Sit down immediately or I'll have you escorted out." Sarah took one deliberate step forward. Her heels clicked against the wooden floor, sharp as a rifle shot. Her eyes locked onto the judge's, unwavering. "With respect, Your Honor, I was there the day Corporal Carter earned that medal," she said. "I watched him drag 12 of us out of hell while bullets tore through the air. He carried me on his back with a hole in his leg. If not for him, I wouldn't be standing here today." Gasps rippled through the gallery. A veteran in a wheelchair straightened, tears glistening in his eyes. Another gripped the pew in front of him, his knuckles white. Sarah continued, her voice growing heavier. charged with emotion that filled every corner of the room. You look at that medal and see metal. I look at it and see blood, sacrifice, and men who never came home. You dared to strip it from his chest as if it were nothing more than jewelry. But let me be clear, that medal isn't decoration, it's debt. Debt to the fallen. Debt to the families who will never hear footsteps return at their door. The silence was deafening. The judge's jaw tightened. He raised the gavel again, but the tremor in his hand betrayed him. "Colonel Ningguan, enough," he barked. "You will not turn this courtroom into a stage." But Sarah didn't flinch. She stepped closer, her posture ramrod straight, her voice steady but louder now, commanding. "You speak of rules and authority, Your Honor," she said. "But you forget what authority is built on. It's built on men like Ethan Carter, on sacrifices you cannot comprehend. Every step he takes at Arlington is not for himself, but for the nameless and faceless, those whose bodies were never brought home. And you, sitting there in your robe, dared to demand he break that vow." The gallery erupted in murmurs, louder this time, charged with electricity. A Vietnam veteran in the back stood shakily, raising his hand in a silent salute. Another followed, then another. The crowd didn't shout. They didn't chant. They stood. One by one, veterans, locals, even the stenographer rose to their feet, their silence louder than thunder. Judge Hargrove slammed his gavel, the sound desperate. "Order! I demand order in this court!" But the room had shifted and everyone could feel it. The authority no longer belonged to the judge. It belonged to the soldier at the witness stand and the colonel who refused to sit down. At the front, Ethan rose slowly. His eyes, steady and unreadable, flicked toward Sarah. Then, without a word, he stepped back to the stand and reached for the medal. His fingers closed around it, the cool metal pressing against his skin. He didn't pin it back on his chest. Instead, he held it tightly, his knuckles white. When he finally spoke, his voice carried with it the weight of every silent grave in Arlington. "I don't stand here for myself," Ethan said, his tone calm but unyielding. "I stand here for the men who can't speak, for the brothers who gave everything, for the ones whose names are etched in stone but never called in roll." The gallery fell silent again. Some wept openly. Others bowed their heads. Sarah moved to stand beside him, her hand resting lightly on his shoulder. She looked back at the judge, her gaze sharp, unrelenting. "This is no longer about property lines or road easements," she said firmly. "This is about respect. You disrespected a soldier, a tomb guard, a Medal of Honor recipient, and in doing so, you disrespected the memory of every fallen warrior in this country." Judge Hargrove's mask of authority cracked. His lips pressed into a thin line, his knuckles white as he gripped the gavel. "Colonel Ningguan," he stammered. "You are out of line." Her eyes narrowed. "No, Your Honor. You are out of line." The words struck like a hammer blow. In the back row, a young man named Jake Morales, an independent journalist with a small YouTube channel, raised his phone higher. He had been recording since Sarah spoke her first words. The red recording light glowed steadily, capturing every second. Judge Hargrove looked around the room, his authority slipping further with every breath. He banged his gavel once more, but the sound no longer commanded respect. It sounded hollow, weak. The tide had turned. Ethan stood at the center, the Medal of Honor clutched in his hand. Sarah stood beside him, her posture unbroken. The crowd stood as silent witnesses, their presence heavier than any gavel strike. And in that moment, the judge realized he had made a grave mistake. Hadn't just demanded a soldier remove his medal, he had challenged the meaning of sacrifice itself. And the price for that arrogance was only beginning to unfold. The gavel pounded, sharp and desperate, but it no longer commanded the room. Judge Hargrove's face flushed crimson, his authority slipping like water through a cracked glass. "Order," he roared. "I will have order in this courtroom." But no one sat down. No one moved. The veterans remained standing, their backs straight, their eyes locked on Ethan and Colonel Sarah. One man, his uniform cap frayed with age, saluted silently. Another, younger, placed his hand over his heart. The gesture spread like fire. Even civilians, farmers, mothers, students, rose from the benches, standing in quiet defiance. Ethan remained at the witness stand, the Medal of Honor clutched in his hand. He didn't raise it. He didn't wear it. He simply held it, the weight of the nation's memory pressed against his palm. When he spoke, his words carried more power than the gavel ever could. "I'm not here to fight a judge," Ethan said softly, yet his voice reached every corner of the room. "I'm here for the men who can't stand where I'm standing. For the brothers who never made it home." The silence that followed was sacred like a prayer. Then Sarah stepped forward, her eyes sharp as steel. "Your Honor, you've done something far worse than mishandle a case. You've disrespected the living embodiment of sacrifice. You've asked a tomb guard to abandon his oath, to remove the very symbol of the fallen." Her words landed like hammer blows. The judge's hand trembled on the gavel. His robe seemed less like authority now and more like a shield he was hiding behind. From the back, Jake Morales, the young journalist, kept recording. His camera phone captured everything: the judge's fury, the colonel's defiance, the soldier's calm strength. The red recording light glowed like an ember, feeding on the fire of the moment. Judge Hargrove slammed the gavel again, but his voice cracked under the pressure. "Clear this courtroom. Bailiff, remove them all." But the bailiff hesitated. His eyes flicked from the crowd to Ethan, then back to the judge. His shoulders stiffened, but he didn't move. Even he seemed unwilling to drag veterans and citizens from the room. The judge's voice broke. "This is my courtroom." Sarah's reply came like a blade. "Not anymore." The gallery erupted, not in chaos, but in unity. Veterans stood taller, civilians whispered prayers, and every camera phone in the room lifted into the air. What had begun as a trial over a property dispute had turned into something far larger, a reckoning. Ethan raised the medal slightly, not high, but enough for the light to catch its shine. His eyes never left the judge's. "This medal doesn't bend to gavels," he said. "It belongs to the dead, and their silence will speak louder than any order you give." The room seemed to hold its breath. Judge Hargrove, his authority shattered, muttered something inaudible, then shoved back his chair. His black robe flared as he stormed out, retreating down the corridor like a man fleeing a battlefield he could not control. The gavel clattered against the bench, abandoned. The silence that followed was alive, electric. No one cheered. No one jeered. They simply stood, bearing witness. Sarah placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder. "You did what they couldn't, Corporal." "You stood." Ethan said nothing. His eyes were distant, the medal still in his grip. But behind them, Jake Morales lowered his phone, his heart racing. He knew what he had captured wasn't just news. It was history. By the time the crowd began to file out, the live stream had already gone viral. Tens of thousands of viewers, then hundreds of thousands, were watching in real time. The comments were relentless. "Honor the fallen. Shame on that judge. This is America." The courthouse steps filled with veterans holding flags, silent as stone. Reporters rushed in, microphones ready, cameras flashing, but Ethan didn't join them. He walked out the back, medal still in hand, his steps measured. 21 forward, pause, turn, repeat. Even here, far from Arlington, the rhythm of the tomb was in his blood. The judge had thought he could strip honor away with the slam of a gavel. Instead, he had lit a fire that would consume his own legacy, and the world had just begun to take notice. Then the video hit the internet like a thunderclap. What began as a shaky live stream from Jake Morales' phone was clipped, shared, and reposted across every platform within hours. By morning, it was impossible to open a screen, TV, laptop, phone, without seeing Ethan Carter standing with the Medal of Honor clutched in his hand, Colonel Sarah Ningwan defying a furious judge, and an entire courtroom of veterans rising in silent unity. The hashtags trended instantly. Honor before gavels. Stand with Ethan. Medal of Honor cable news anchors replayed the footage on a loop. Commentators debated furiously, but one truth was undeniable. The judge had humiliated a soldier who embodied sacrifice, and the nation wasn't going to forget it. Clips of Ethan's words were cut into short bursts, shared millions of times. "This medal doesn't bend to gavels. It belongs to the dead." The sentence struck like scripture, repeated across headlines and protest signs. At Arlington National Cemetery, guards on duty walked their eternal steps, but something in their measured movements seemed heavier that day. Tourists stood in hushed silence, some with phones lowered, others with tears streaming as they whispered Ethan's name. Meanwhile, Judge Hargrove sat in his oak-paneled office, blinds drawn, phone ringing off the hook. His email inbox overflowed with fury. Letters from veterans groups, petitions from citizens, calls for his resignation. Local papers plastered his face under damning headlines. Judge disrespects Medal of Honor hero. Courtroom showdown sparks national outrage. Whose authority do we respect? He threw the morning paper across the room, his hands trembling. They twist everything, he muttered, but the words sounded hollow even to himself. His staff avoided eye contact, their loyalty fraying. The courthouse steps had become a gathering place for protesters waving American flags and banners. Honor Ethan. Fire the judge. The gavel that once symbolized his power now sat untouched on his desk, a relic of authority slipping through his grasp. Across town, Ethan Carter wasn't watching the news. He sat on his porch, the medal lying on the wooden table beside him. His gaze was fixed on the horizon, his thoughts far away. In the desert sands where he'd carried Sarah through fire. In the silence of the tomb where every step was a vow. Sarah joined him, 2 mugs of coffee in hand. She placed one before him, her eyes studying his face. "You know the country's watching you now," she said. "I didn't ask for that," Ethan replied, his voice steady but tired. "All I ever wanted was to stand guard. Nothing more." "But that's why they listen," Sarah said. "You didn't chase cameras. You didn't make speeches. You just stood. That's what terrifies people like Hargrove. They build their power on noise, and you built yours on silence." Ethan didn't answer. He reached for the medal, running his thumb over its engraved surface. To him, it wasn't a trophy. It was a reminder. By noon, the protest had spread beyond the courthouse. In Washington, D.C., veterans in uniform gathered on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial. Rolling Thunder bikers thundered down highways with flags streaming behind them. Gold Star families stood with framed photos of sons and daughters, their grief sharpened into resolve. The nation had found its symbol, and it wasn't a judge's gavel. News networks scrambled for interviews. Politicians weighed in, some cautiously, others loudly, sensing the storm. One senator declared on live TV, "When a judge disrespects a Medal of Honor, he disrespects the country itself. That's not justice, it's arrogance." Clips of his statement ricocheted across social media. Pressure mounted. Petitions crossed 1 million signatures in less than 24 hours. Jake Morales, the young journalist, found himself at the center of the whirlwind. His subscriber count skyrocketed. News crews swarmed him for rights to his footage. But when asked why he kept filming, Jake's answer was simple: because truth belongs to everyone. That day, Ethan Carter reminded us what honor looks like. Inside his office, Judge Hargrove felt the walls closing in. Calls from higher courts demanded explanations. The Bar Association issued a statement calling his behavior inconsistent with the dignity of the bench. Even his old allies distanced themselves, unwilling to be dragged down with him. His arrogance turned to desperation. He ranted about authority, about losing control, but deep inside he knew the truth. He hadn't just lost a case, he had lost the nation's respect, and once lost, respect could never be reclaimed. Back at Ethan's porch, Sarah's phone buzzed with notifications. She glanced at the screen, then turned it toward him. It was the live stream counter. Over 20 million views. "Ethan," she said softly, "this isn't just about a courtroom anymore. It's about what people believe in. They're standing with you. They're waiting for you to lead." Ethan's jaw tightened. "I'm no leader. I'm a guard. That's all I know how to be." Sarah smiled faintly. "And that's exactly why they trust you." That night, the protest outside the courthouse grew into a vigil. Candles flickered in the dark. Names of the fallen whispered into the night air. Veterans in wheelchairs, young cadets in crisp uniforms, mothers clutching folded flags, they stood shoulder to shoulder, united by a single truth. Honor was not negotiable. A Marine veteran took the microphone, his voice breaking. "When you strip a Medal of Honor from one of us, you strip it from all of us. We won't allow it." The crowd roared, not with anger, but with conviction. Somewhere in the shadows, Jake's camera caught Ethan walking silently among them. He didn't speak. He didn't wave. He simply placed his medal at the foot of a memorial wreath, bowed his head, and stepped back. The gesture said everything. By the next morning, the judge's resignation was trending before it was even official. Sources claimed he had been pressured by both political leaders and judicial committees. His career, once untouchable, had crumbled overnight. But Ethan didn't celebrate. He sat quietly, polishing his shoes the same way he always did before standing guard. Sarah watched him, her eyes proud but somber. "You've changed the country, Corporal, whether you meant to or not." Ethan shook his head. "Not me, them, the ones we stand for. The ones who never came home." His voice softened, almost a whisper. "I just carried their silence." And as the nation burned with outrage and unity, one truth settled deep into the hearts of millions. Honor could be challenged. It could even be mocked, but it could never be removed. Not by a judge. Not by a gavel. Not by anyone. The courthouse, once a symbol of Judge Hargrove's authority, had become a fortress under siege. Each morning he arrived through the back entrance, his face hidden beneath a coat and hat, as protesters lined the front steps with flags and banners. His name was painted on signs in bold red letters: Hargrove, dishonor. Respect our soldiers. Step down now. The chants echoed through the stone walls of the courthouse, haunting him even inside his chambers. His once loyal staff now whispered in corners, avoiding his gaze. Clerks who once jumped to his command moved with hesitation. The bailiff, once his staunch enforcer, had grown distant. Every gavel strike now felt like a hollow echo of power he no longer possessed. The media hounded him relentlessly. Satellite vans lined the street outside his home. News anchors dissected every detail of his ruling, replaying the footage of him demanding Ethan Carter remove his Medal of Honor. Clips of Colonel Sarah Ningguan declaring, "No, Your Honor. You are out of line," played on loop. Each repetition chipped away at his credibility, carving his arrogance into public shame. Behind closed doors, the pressure mounted. Calls from the Judicial Review Board warned him of an ethics inquiry. Senators demanded explanations. His colleagues in the legal community, once allies, now distanced themselves. The Bar Association issued a damning statement, calling his behavior a breach of judicial dignity and respect. He slammed the phone down after one such call, pacing his office like a caged animal. "They don't understand," he muttered to himself. "I am the law here. My word is order. My gavel is final." But his voice cracked on the last word. The silence that followed felt heavier than any verdict he had ever given. Meanwhile, Ethan Carter remained silent. While news crews begged for interviews and reporters camped outside his small house, Ethan simply refused to speak. He continued his quiet routines, waking before dawn, polishing his shoes, walking his property in deliberate, measured steps as though still on duty. To the nation, his silence became more powerful than any speech. Editorials praised him. A soldier's quiet dignity speaks louder than a judge's arrogance. Veterans groups adopted his words as rallying cries. Across America, small towns held vigils. In schools, children recited Ethan's line, "This medal doesn't bend to gavels." Teachers explained what it meant, to honor those who had given their lives for freedom. Ethan's silence had become the voice of a nation. For Judge Hargrove, however, silence was poison. Each night, alone in his study, he scrolled through headlines that condemned him. The faces of veterans stared back at him from the screen, eyes full of disappointment and rage. He turned on the TV one evening only to see a live panel of Gold Star mothers. One woman, holding a folded flag in her lap, looked directly into the camera. "My son gave his life for this country," she said. "That medal represents him, and Judge Hargrove tried to take it away. He didn't just disrespect Ethan Carter, he disrespected all of us." Hargrove threw the remote at the wall, his breathing ragged, but the words clung to him, impossible to shake. The breaking point came during a live broadcast outside the courthouse. Reporters had gathered for a press conference. The rumor was that the judge would issue a statement. Instead, what they captured was chaos. As Hargrove exited his car, protesters surged forward, waving flags and chanting, "Honor the fallen." "Fire the judge." Camera crews closed in. Microphones shoved toward his face. "Judge Hargrove, do you regret ordering Corporal Carter to remove his medal? Will you resign? Do you believe you still hold the public's trust?" Hargrove's face twisted with rage. He raised his hands, trying to shout over the noise. "I am the authority here. My word is the law. You don't understand the pressures of this bench." But before he could finish, a veteran stepped forward from the crowd. His uniform was old, his medals dull with age, but his stance was steady. "You don't understand honor," the veteran said. The crowd erupted, their voices surging like a tidal wave. The cameras captured every second. That clip, too, went viral. By the following morning, the judge's name was synonymous with disgrace. The Judicial Review Board moved swiftly. In an unprecedented decision, they stripped Hargrove of his seat, citing conduct unbecoming of a federal judge. The announcement spread across every news channel. Protesters outside the courthouse cheered. Veterans saluted. Families wept with relief. The man who once commanded silence with a gavel now left the courthouse under heavy security. His head bowed, his legacy in ruins. But Ethan Carter wasn't there to see it. He was at Arlington, standing in the soft morning light. His uniform was immaculate, his shoes polished, the Medal of Honor pinned back on his chest. He walked the sacred steps in silence. 21 forward, pause, 21 back. His movements were measured, eternal, a rhythm that belonged not to him but to the fallen. Tourists watched from a respectful distance. Some saluted. Some simply stood with tears in their eyes. Among them was Jake Morales, his camera lowered this time. He didn't need to film. The world already knew the story. Sarah stood nearby, her hands clasped behind her back. She looked at Ethan, pride shining in her eyes. "You won, Corporal," she whispered. But Ethan didn't answer. His eyes remained forward, his steps unbroken. Because for him, there was no victory, only duty. Judge Hargrove spent his final days in obscurity. His name stripped from plaques, his career erased from history books. But Ethan's words lived on. In classrooms, on protest signs, in quiet prayers at gravesides, people repeated them. This medal doesn't bend to gavels. It belongs to the dead. And so, while a judge fell into disgrace, a soldier's silence carried on, steadier than any gavel, stronger than any courtroom, eternal as the tomb itself. The resignation of Judge Robert Hargrove was meant to end the firestorm. But it didn't. In fact, it was only the beginning of his unraveling. For decades, he had built his life on control. His courtroom was his kingdom, his robe, his armor, his gavel, his sword. But now, stripped of it all, he was just a man, and the world knew him not for justice, but for disgrace. The morning after his resignation, the front page of every major newspaper carried his picture. Not the proud portrait from his years on the bench, but the raw footage of him storming out of the courthouse, face twisted with anger as veterans stood in defiance. The headlines were merciless. The judge who dishonored honor. From gavel to shame, the fall of Hargrove. Medal of Honor judge forced out. His phone didn't stop buzzing. Old colleagues, once eager for his company, now avoided him. Some messages were blunt. "Don't contact me again." Others were colder. Silence. At home, his wife wouldn't meet his eyes. His grown children refused his calls. "You brought this on yourself," his son texted before blocking his number. Hargrove's world had collapsed into a suffocating silence, except for the relentless noise of the outside. Whirled across the nation, Ethan Carter's story had taken root. Clips of him refusing to remove his medal, or doing so with that quiet, deliberate precision, were played in classrooms, in town halls, and living rooms. Commentators debated the meaning of honor, of sacrifice, of respect. But the people weren't divided. They were united. Veterans from every war, from World War II to Afghanistan, stood shoulder to shoulder in silent vigils. They didn't shout. They didn't riot. They simply stood in formation, flags raised, a living wall of respect. They weren't there for politics. They weren't there for spectacle. They were there for Ethan. Ethan, who never once addressed the cameras. Ethan, who never claimed victimhood. Ethan, who simply returned to his post at the tomb, his steps echoing as if to remind America what honor sounded like. Hargrove watched it all unfold from the dim light of his study. His curtains drawn, his television glowing, his own face replayed again and again, always in shame, always contrasted with Ethan's quiet dignity. He tried to fight back. He hired a PR consultant who suggested issuing a public apology. But when he stood before the cameras, the words stuck in his throat. His arrogance still burned too brightly. "I never disrespected the military," he snapped in one interview. "I only demanded order in my courtroom." "That soldier," the host cut him off. "That soldier is a Medal of Honor recipient, Judge. And America believes you did more than demand order. You demanded he dishonor the dead." The interview went viral within hours. His consultant quit the next day. Meanwhile, Ethan Carter's life remained unchanged on the surface, but something deeper stirred beneath it. He had become a symbol, but symbols carry weight. Strangers stopped him on the street to thank him. Veterans mailed him folded flags, handwritten notes, their own service medals with messages like, "You carry this for us now." Reporters begged for statements, but Ethan always shook his head. "I'm not the story," he said once to Jake Morales, the freelance reporter whose live stream had gone viral. "The medal is." Jake, who had become something of a friend, pressed gently. "But people look to you, Corporal. You've given them something to believe in." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Then let them believe in the men who didn't come home." "Not me." That was the last time Jake asked. For Judge Hargrove, there was no such escape. He stopped leaving his house. His wife eventually left him, taking what little peace remained. His name was stripped from legal associations, plaques, even the high school gymnasium he once sponsored. But the worst wound came not from strangers, but from those who once respected him. Veterans organizations blacklisted him. Local schools canceled his speaking engagements. Churches declined his donations. He was alive, but he had been erased, and he knew why. It wasn't the mistake. It wasn't the ruling. It was the arrogance. It was the moment when he demanded that Ethan Carter remove not just a medal, but the memory of the fallen. The world could forgive mistakes, but it would not forgive disrespect. Ethan never celebrated the judge's downfall. When asked about it, he simply shook his head. "I'm not here for revenge," he said softly. "I'm here for respect." Those words spread like wildfire. For many, they cut deeper than anger ever could, because while Hargrove's life crumbled in bitterness, Ethan Carter walked in silence, each step a reminder that true strength is not in shouting, but in standing. Months later, Hargrove was seen one final time in public. He stood at the edge of Arlington National Cemetery, far from the crowds, watching Ethan's precise steps at the tomb of the unknown soldier. No cameras were there. No protesters. Just a broken man and a soldier. For the first time, Hargrove removed his hat and lowered his head. His lips moved as though whispering an apology, though no one would ever hear it. And Ethan? He didn't stop. He didn't look up. He didn't break his rhythm, because his duty was not to men like Hargrove. It was to the fallen, and the fallen never asked for apologies. They asked only for remembrance. Winter had settled over Arlington. The branches were bare, the air sharp, the sky washed in pale gray. Snow dusted the marble headstones, softening the endless rows of white. Ethan Carter walked his post in silence. 21 steps forward, paused, 21 steps back. Each measured stride left prints in the snow, but the rhythm remained unchanged, eternal. Visitors gathered at the rails, bundled in coats and scarves. Some whispered prayers. Others stood with tears shining in their eyes. Yet no sound disturbed the sacred cadence of the tomb guard's watch. Among them was Jake Morales, camera lowered, hands deep in his pockets. He had filmed the story that shook the nation, but today, he didn't record. Some moments weren't meant for screens. They were meant for hearts. Colonel Sarah Ningguan stood off to the side, her posture as straight as ever. She had fought battles across oceans, carried scars both visible and unseen, but nothing had moved her as deeply as watching Ethan Carter stand, unbending, unbroken, when a gavel tried to silence him. When Ethan completed his rotation, she approached quietly. "The world hasn't stopped talking about you, Corporal," she said. Ethan's breath clouded in the cold. He didn't smile, but his eyes softened. "Then they're talking about the wrong man." Sarah tilted her head. "You don't believe that." "I do," Ethan replied firmly. "I was never the story. The story belongs to the ones lying here, to the ones whose names are carved in stone. My medal is just metal. Their sacrifice is forever." Sarah said nothing. She knew arguing was useless. Ethan wasn't built for fame. He was built for silence, for the kind that spoke louder than words. Across the country, his silence had already become a movement. Schools began teaching his story as part of lessons on honor and sacrifice. Veterans halls displayed his words on banners. This medal doesn't bend to gavels. It belongs to the dead. Every Memorial Day, vigils formed at courthouses and cemeteries. Not loud rallies, not angry protests, just silence. People stood shoulder to shoulder, imitating Ethan's vow. No sound, no movement, only respect. It became known as the Carter Silence, and in that silence, the fallen lived again. Judge Hargrove's name, meanwhile, faded from memory. His disgrace was complete. But Ethan never mentioned him. Not once. For Ethan, revenge wasn't the goal. Respect was. And in the end, respect had won. One evening, as the sun set in streaks of gold across the cemetery, Ethan paused mid-step. The shadows stretched long, the cold air still. He looked across the rows of marble, his jaw set, his eyes heavy with the weight of thousands of unspoken stories. He whispered, just loud enough for the wind to carry. I stood when they asked me to bend, but I didn't stand for myself. I stood for you. No one heard him but the silence, and yet that silence was enough because silence carries, silence endures, silence remembers. As the guard resumed his eternal watch, a nation carried his vow in their hearts. And so the story of a soldier and his medal became something greater than headlines, greater than courts, greater even than the downfall of a judge. It became a reminder carved into the conscience of a country. Honor is not given. It is earned. It is lived. And it can never be taken away. Not by power, not by arrogance, not by the strike of a gavel, only remembered in silence. Forever.